You lift the same weight, the same reps, the same routine week after week. And then, without warning, your muscles just stop. You assume you need more protein. You assume you need more sets. You assume your body has hit some kind of genetic ceiling. But the science shows something different. Your muscles didn't stop growing because they ran out of capacity. They stopped because they ran out of a signal. To understand why, you have to understand what actually makes a muscle fiber grow in the first place. It's not the pump. It's not the soreness the next day. It's a process called mechanotransduction, and it starts the moment a muscle fiber is placed under enough tension that it can't easily handle the load. Think of each muscle fiber as a tiny sensor. When you load it heavily enough, specialized proteins inside the cell membrane detect that mechanical stress and convert it into a chemical signal. That signal travels into the cell and activates a pathway called mTOR, which is short for mechanistic target of rapamycin. mTOR is the switch that tells your muscle to start building new proteins. Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, one of the most cited hypertrophy researchers alive today, has spent over a decade mapping exactly how this tension to growth pathway works. His 2010 review in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research laid out 3 primary mechanisms of hypertrophy: mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. But his later work, including a 2016 meta-analysis, made something increasingly clear. Mechanical tension is the dominant driver. Not the burn, not the soreness. Tension. So why would tension suddenly stop working if you're still lifting the same weight you always have? Because your muscle fiber has already adapted to that exact stimulus. The first time you lifted a challenging weight, your fibers experienced tension they had never handled before. That novelty is what triggered growth. But muscle is remarkably efficient. Once a fiber builds enough contractile proteins to comfortably manage a given load, that load no longer represents a challenge. The mechanical stress drops below the threshold needed to activate mTOR signaling. The switch stays off. Growth stalls, not because your body forgot how to build muscle, but because you stopped giving it a reason to. This is where progressive overload comes in, and it's more than a slogan you hear at the gym. It's a physiological requirement. Without a progressive increase in tension, whether through added weight, added reps, added volume, or reduced rest, the signal that started the growth process in the first place simply disappears. But tension is only half the story. Even when the signal is present, your muscle still needs raw material and the biological machinery to use it. This is where protein synthesis comes in, and it's more fragile than most people realize. Dr. Stuart Phillips at McMaster University has spent decades studying how muscle protein synthesis actually behaves after training. His research shows that a single bout of resistance exercise elevates muscle protein synthesis for roughly 24 to 48 hours. During that window, your body is actively repairing and building new contractile tissue, assuming it has enough amino acids available. Here's the part that surprises most people. Phillips's work also shows that muscle protein synthesis has a ceiling. Beyond a certain intake, roughly 0.7 to 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight spread across the day, additional protein does not meaningfully increase the rate of muscle building. The machinery is only capable of processing so much at once. So if your training is stalled and you respond by simply eating more protein, you're pouring fuel into an engine that's already running at capacity. The bottleneck was never the fuel. It was the mechanical signal telling the engine to run faster in the first place. But there's a third piece to this puzzle, and it's the one almost nobody talks about. It involves something called satellite cells. Muscle fibers are unusual cells. Unlike most cells in your body, they're extremely large and contain multiple nuclei, each one responsible for managing protein production within its own small territory of the cell, called a myonuclear domain. Here's the key limitation. Each nucleus can only support a finite amount of cytoplasm and contractile protein around it. As a muscle fiber grows larger, at some point the existing nuclei can no longer keep up with the demand for more protein synthesis machinery. To keep growing, the fiber needs more nuclei. That's where satellite cells come in. These are small, dormant stem cells sitting on the outside of muscle fibers, waiting for a signal to activate. When training produces enough mechanical tension and micro-level disruption, satellite cells proliferate, migrate to the muscle fiber, and donate their nuclei directly into it. This process, sometimes called myonuclear addition, effectively expands the fiber's capacity to keep growing. In 2008, researchers Petrella, Kim, Mayhew, Cross, and Bamman published a striking study in the Journal of Applied Physiology, examining why some people respond dramatically to resistance training, while others barely respond at all, despite following identical programs. What they found was that so-called extreme responders had significantly greater satellite cell activation and myonuclear addition compared to non-responders. The people who plateaued quickly weren't training incorrectly. Their muscle fibers simply weren't recruiting new nuclei fast enough to sustain further growth. Which raises an important question. If satellite cell activation depends on training stimulus, does that mean plateaus are permanent for some people? Not at all. It means the type and progression of the stimulus matters enormously. Static, repetitive training at a fixed intensity fails to consistently trigger satellite cell activity because the fiber has already adapted to that intensity. Varying load, increasing volume over time, and periodically pushing into genuinely unfamiliar tension ranges reactivates the entire cascade, from mechanotransduction to protein synthesis to satellite cell recruitment. There's one more counterintuitive finding worth understanding here, and it comes from the work of Bruno Damas and colleagues, published in a series of studies through the mid-2000s. Their research tracked muscle protein synthesis and actual measured hypertrophy over 10 weeks of training in previously untrained subjects. Early in a training program, muscle protein synthesis spikes dramatically after each workout. But interestingly, that early synthesis correlates poorly with long-term muscle growth. Much of it is repairing exercise-induced muscle damage rather than building new contractile tissue. Over time, as damage decreases, a smaller but more consistent proportion of protein synthesis gets redirected specifically toward adding new muscle protein. In other words, the soreness and swelling you feel in week 1 is not a reliable indicator of growth. It's largely repair work. Real sustained hypertrophy shows up later, and it depends on your ability to keep generating a stimulus your muscle hasn't fully adapted to yet. So when you put all three mechanisms together, the picture becomes clear. Mechanical tension has to exceed what the fiber has already adapted to, or the growth switch never activates. Protein synthesis has to be adequately fueled, but only up to a point past which more input yields no more output. And satellite cells have to be recruited to expand each fiber's genetic real estate, which only happens with a training stimulus that continues to challenge the muscle in new ways. Your muscles didn't stop growing because you're broken, or because you've hit some hard genetic wall. They stopped growing because the signal that started the entire cascade weakened. The tension became familiar. The synthesis leveled off. The satellite cells had no new demand to respond to. So what does this mean for your training starting today? It means the number on the bar matters less than whether that number represents genuine, unfamiliar challenge to the muscle fiber right now. If you've been doing the same 3 sets of 10 for months, your fibers have already solved that puzzle. Progressive overload doesn't have to mean adding 20 pounds overnight. It can mean an extra rep this week, a slower eccentric that extends time under tension, a new exercise variation that challenges the muscle from a different angle, or simply enough added load tracked consistently that your body never fully settles into comfort. It means eating enough protein to support the process, without assuming more is automatically better. And it means recognizing that soreness is not the goal. Soreness is often just cleanup work. Growth is quieter, slower, and it's measured over months of consistently unfamiliar tension, not over a single brutal workout. Your muscles aren't refusing to grow. They're simply waiting for a reason to.